Okay, welcome everyone to the final real lecture for 2021. We hope you're ready for another exciting and thought-provoking lecture. Now, before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Tonight's guests are Andrew Tucker and Wesley Perrott from COX Architects. COX Architects was founded by Philip Cox and specializes in architecture, interior design and planning, and urban design. They have offices in each major Australian city and work on a huge range of typologies. Tonight's lecture is entitled Macro and Micro, Designing to Various Scale. Using the new and under construction Geelong Civic Accommodation Building as a case study, Andrew and Wes will illustrate the need for architects and designers to look at design through various lenses, to design at various scale from the macro, being precinct planning and urban design, through to micro, being detailing of structural elements. Now, before we begin, feel free to comment with any questions for Andrew and Wes in the live chat below. And for now, I'll hand over to Andrew and Wes.
Good evening, all. Thank you for your time. Lovely to be here and very honoured to be invited to speak to you today. My name is Andrew Tucker. I'm a director at COX Architecture. With me today is Wesley Perrott, who's a project associate. We thought it's a really interesting topic. We thought we'd address the topic through a case study, one that's of particular importance to you, right next door to the campus at the waterfront there, the new Geelong Civic Accommodation Project, which we can see here highlighted in red. This was a project conceived in about 2019. It was a call out to developers to reimagine the precinct and the site with the brief to consolidate the local council offices in Geelong. It's made up of a large team here, so very unique in the way that this was procured. It was a consortium and a design competition with all of these partners involved, from the builders to the developers to the structural engineers to the landscape architects to ourselves. Very much a challenge in how we approach the project. The general brief here really was about 7 council workplaces are currently in Geelong. The idea was to amalgamate them into one facility to house them as the new council headquarters. There's a site, obviously the car park that was previously here, was owned by council. It was an idea to reactivate the edge of Mercer Street and Jerringham Street. Very much about a new civic place. There's been a lot of work going on about precinct development in Geelong. The Green Spine's obviously been underway for a long time. The arts precinct is really starting to get traction. The laneways component in Geelong is really starting to take off. And this was seen as another opportunity to develop the site and the surrounding precincts. Just to jump to it, the reason we're talking today about macro versus micro is about how we would typically approach a project from start to finish, and what are the key ideas. COX and many architects never approach buildings from the existing footprint of a site. We're always looking about what its local context is, and that is really focusing on the macro we're talking about here. Where is the site sited within a city, within a local township? So we really start to look at things that relate to precincts, to area. We start to touch on the cultural heritage of sites. What was it in its past? You can see down over here, it's actually a series of old beautiful buildings, manufacturing. And we start to sit there and think, how can we touch on the history of a site, but redevelop it? One of the key projects that's been underway now in Geelong for many years is the greening of the Geelong Green Spine. We've proposed basically that our new building site on Mercer Street, which is opposite the gardens, is a great location. It really does connect a series of precincts. We were encouraging the council to continue the green spine up to the Botanic Gardens, and how we can then start to address Mercer Street as well. One of the big approaches from our developer and us with the as the lead design consultant there was, we were given a site by council, as you can see here, which fronted Mercer Street. It had a connection to Jerringhap Street and surrounded by a series of industrial buildings, some vacant sites, some well used, some not. What our developer came back with was, how do we make this the best opportunity possible? They ended up buying sites up around the existing site. So they've purchased 4 blocks of land, which allowed suddenly this site to almost double in size. It provided connection from Mercer Street through to Bailey Laneway, and it provided connection from Mercer Street to Jerringhap Street. So suddenly our triangle site had 3 faces. Initial sketching, what were we looking at doing? How were we approaching this building? We've got at various levels, and the point here was to connect between Mercer Street and Bailey Street and connect between Mercer Street and Jerringhap Street, but fundamentally was to deal with the level change. So we've got almost a full building height going from Mercer Street to Jerringhap Street, and we started to look at how do we encourage people and pedestrians to transverse through the site, make this a permeable site, to encourage movement through and really make this a civic space that is welcoming for all. On top of that, what we then started to look at doing is, how can we create a series of buildings or a campus of buildings which can be placed within this, permeable ground plane to create an active podium. So as we get into the detail, you'll start to understand that we've got various levels of movement through the building and through the site. The active podium is to make sure that we've got that visual connection to ground. We've got activation. We're inviting people and the public realm up into the building, but at the same time, it is something that can be secured off. And then on top of that, we've basically put the campus function on top. So the more conventional office approach, the glass box that sits floating lightly on top. And then that's been designed to house all the functions that are required and suit the client's brief. The precinct master plan actually, it works in the way of a campus of buildings. So there are actually 3 buildings, which in yellow, the focus here is this civic accommodation building, which is the new council headquarters, which has a basement, a ground floor plane, a podium, and then 4 stories of office accommodation. There's the heritage building of 151 Mercer Street on the corner there, which has been renovated, refurbished, and will offer a retail component to the site. There's what's called the QE building, which is the developer's own privately owned office building. They'll be looking to lease out new tenants for that in the coming 12 months, but they're going to develop that site, and so it becomes a campus of buildings. And then there's an existing building which has got planning approval at 16 Jerringhap, which is on the corner of the site, which is owned by a third party. So suddenly this corner development and this triangle site has the opportunity to house, potentially 1,800 people. It's going to be a flurry of activity, and it's a master plan that we've been looking at now that is not just delivering something in the short term, but it's ultimately a 20-year master plan for the precinct. Just some of the visual renders there. Great proximity, beautiful waterfront development. Couple of the key drivers here from day one is, how do we make this the most attractive commercial office building possible? How do we make sure that this is something that is unique to Geelong? And probably the first design approach that we looked at here was, can we get a mass timber structure working? So CLT, cross-laminated timber, glulam beams, Everything that you see in our photos coming up, and you've probably seen if you've been down at the waterfront campus there, is raw exposed timber structure. It's beautiful to be in. It's lovely to see. But we've got a proper hybrid construction here. We have concrete on the ground floor, in the basement and the ground. We've got a floating timber structure that sits above, and then some composite steel structure elements in there as well. The other elements to this is a roof terrace, so active roof spaces, great views across to Johnson Park. We're really encouraging that active ground plan where we've designed the podium as function space. It's going to have public spaces going in there. There are going to be community meetings. There's flexible spaces that can be amended and changed to suit everyone's needs. We're bringing in retail precincts as well to this. The local coffee shop we've been touting is it a little a bike store there. We've got these fantastic end of trip facilities where we're encouraging less cars. We want to match facilities that we're seeing in Melbourne, where we're actually providing showers, changing facilities, bike storage, the opportunity for people to walk to work. And we've also creating, importantly, is a new civic heart. So a place where people can gather, they can join, they can meet people. It's the train station's across the road. We really do see this as almost one of the first points of call from a visitor getting off the train before wandering in through the Geelong city centre. The urban design, again, just to sort of now go into the next scale, we've been looking at something as Geelong CBD. We're now going into our immediate precinct, which has been redefined as the civic precinct. You can start to see the connections, the new civic heart that we're focusing on here, bringing together the campus of buildings, but also a place where people can move through the site. That connection to Bailey Street was literally one of the fundamental drivers to the whole design. Equitable access has been a big topic of conversation for this site. So making sure that we've got at-grade DDA accessible access throughout the site. It's inclusive to all. We've got our connection to Jerringham Street. We've got public lift access to deal with the one floor story change of. We've got the new retail hub of 151 Mercer Street, excuse me. And we've almost got a second entrance over here to the west, which is that connection to the train station. So local workers coming from the trains, crossing the road and being able to enter our building immediately. Again, some of these very early sketches, and again, this is really interesting to see how we translate ideas into our buildings. Not everything is about 3D modeling. Beautiful hand drawings that are illustrating, ground plane, how we're moving through the site. This is obviously a hand section, pen and paper with a ruler, getting out to get the fundamentals to it. And these are one of the first drawings that we've done, and we're holding true to these design approaches. You can start to see the connection between Mercer Street and Bailey Street. We've got that solid plinth base where we've then got a podium floor, which is that sort of lighter glazed podium. We've got our timber structure that's sitting on top and a roof garden. So as you see this building go through its stages of this presentation, you'll recognise that this diagram holds true, with this big five-storey high atrium, which really connects the building. We've got a section looking in the opposite direction from our west all the way through to the east. You can start to see the level difference between Jerringham and Mercer Street. While we're focusing on the building on the left-hand side there being the council building, we're always designing what are the opportunities with this other building. So we designed the initial QE building as well in parallel to the council building. They will have aesthetically similar approaches and moves, but they are independent buildings of each other. Again, just having a look at how we address a car park. So we do have a basement car park under this whole building. It's accessed off of Jerringham Street. So we're starting now to look at the different scale of movement within the building and within the precinct. So we're looking at how people might arrive on the site. So we've got access points in the round here. You can access it from Jerringham Street. You can access it from Mercer Street. End of trip facilities on the north side here. And we're seeing the idea is that people can move bikes up and through, pedestrian movement up and through directly into changing rooms, or to park your bike, you're coming through the driveway and down and through the basement. Excuse me. We've separated loading as well. So again, really important to understand the separation between people movement, bike movement, and also delivery movement. So we've got 2 loading docks. They're at the back of the buildings. They're not within our public realm. We want people moving through this site. This is a pedestrian-friendly area. We're taking our loading docks off these second-grade roads, and we're minimising that crossover. The next focus was really about where's the building cores? How do we get the most efficient floor plates? But equally, how do those floor plates and the cores relate to our ground plane? We see the council building here, the ground floor foyer, is an extension of our civic heart. We want it to be a welcoming space. It's something that is inviting. People are moving through from the civic heart into this foyer. You've got workers that can come up through the building, but you've also then got visitors that can access the council facilities and their what's called their front of house services offices. We've got retail, importantly, on the edges. You know, we often talk about active edges and active retail components. You know, we're consciously making sure that we're encouraging people, you know, as people walk through on the footpaths, that they get a glimpse of something. It might be the local coffee bar. It might be a shop that they're interested in. It's F&B retail, but it's the encouragement to actually get people to come into this site. Just some illustrations on those active edges. And then also just encouraging that movement through the site. We want people to hold in this civic area. It's a place where we're encouraging office workers to come in and have lunch. They can sit down on the park benches. They can, you know, beautiful green area over here to the north, which is getting northwest sunlight on a sort of winter's day. But equally, what we're trying to do here is provide complementary spaces. So while it's very easy for us to look at this scale in this building, in this precinct, what we've consciously said is whatever we do here, let's not remove something that is happening elsewhere on the site. So the Geelong Waterfront campus, let's not compete with it. It needs to be complementary. Johnson Park, why would we go and grass our civic heart when we've got a giant park across the road? So we're always consciously thinking about complementary spaces to encourage better use of everything within the precincts, not within just our building footprint. Many of you may or may not know, but there is an old spur line, the spur line being the old rail tracks from the industrial wool era, which used to connect the pier. So there's a few little subtle hints where we've as we go through this detail, but we start to reference things on the floor, you know, down to just little plaque elements that explain some of these historical elements. Again, a different jump to scale. Wesley, do you want to just run through some building?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. So we're going to have a quick chat about built form, street frontages and site entrances. So I think what Andrew touched on, one of the really unique aspects of this site is that the site has 3 active frontages, so Mercer Street, Bailey Street and Jerringham Street. There's just not one entrance or frontage to the building. So we're going to zoom in on the Mercer Street arrival. So as you enter through Geelong into the CBD and you come down Mercer Street, you're exposed to the western facade of the Civic Accommodation building. So next. So you can see the layering that Andrew was referring to in the hand sketch. We've got our brick podium, we've got our recessed facade, and we've got our glass office tower, and then we've got our recessed plant level 4, which is also a half office and plant as well. The west facade obviously gets quite a bit of heat load, so we've got the shade fins that are stretched throughout the whole facade, and also, as you can see here, and then from a detail perspective, you can see the slight perforations running through each of the fins. And that was an opportunity to incorporate Aboriginal artwork, which was part of the brief, Aboriginal engagement and art throughout the precinct and into the building. You see it being fabricated into the west facade fins. Then we moved to the Mercer Street Main Street arrival, which is opposite the Town Hall and Johnston Park, and the entrance to the Civic Heart. So here you can see we continue the brick podium around through the full perimeter of the building. We've got a 2-story height void that opens you up to the civic precinct, provides some shelter as you walk through the space. You can see we've got the curved glass form and corner, which invites you into the precinct. And then we've got the light timber canopy on top, which caps the building. And then off to the right, you can see the office tower, which really bookends the site. Here we are on Mercer Street, so just talking about some of the ways that we've tried to create active frontages. So putting in windows so you can see through the building and creating transparency. So one of the aspects was democracy on show, the theming of the building. So the idea that there was a transparency between council and the occupants of the building, the people in the street in the city of Geelong. So we can see into our customer service area down on ground floor. Then the podium level is the multi-purpose space and function centre. And then we've got the office levels above. And then the brick podium was really spawned by some of the brick heritage in Geelong and the idea of reinforcing the brick trade and the heritage buildings in the local context. And then we move through to Jerringham Street, which is your key arterial road through from the CBD down to the waterfront. So this is where you've got the quintessential equity developer building. So you can see the steps, the idea of not just having steps up through, but landscape opportunities for seating and social interaction. Again, playing on the double story height space that you have with the landscape stepping down that extra level. Off the left, you can see we've hidden the entrance to the car park for the precinct through Coria Street. And then off to Bailey Street, which is, next slide. Next slide, yep. So continuing the brick podium around, food and beverage and retail outlets activating the street frontages. And you can see this laneway that we refer to as Bailey Laneway connecting through to the civic precinct. So one of the key things is creating sight lines through the site. You don't really want to create dead ends walking through open spaces. So both from Jerringham and Mercer and Bailey Street, you can see through the slide, and that's an opportunity for wayfinding, passive wayfinding through the precinct. And then we've got our Civic Heart, which was the events platform. And this operates as your main entrance into the civic accommodation building. So here you can see the, I think it's 6-story high atrium. So you can see that you've got the entry canopy, and that becomes your entrance to your customer service centre and also to the rest of the building.
I think it's really interesting just on the point, even just as we're talking about through these slides, we're constantly changing scale every time we talk to you about what we're looking at. And that's a conscious decision when we're designing. We move in and we move out as we design a building. So when we're talking about facades, we're talking about the precinct, the arrival, why are we doing something, how are we doing it? But even to go down to the detail of, well, what's the integration on our facade? What's the detail to the facade? The sun shading devices, you know, the Aboriginal artwork. You know, it's always important as architects to ensure that we are zooming in and zooming back as and when necessary to focus on different things. As we move through the building here now, so we're going to go into the next scale, which is the look and the feel and the people movement within a space. And we've stepped now in through the front door. This is our 5-story, 6-story tall atrium space. And the big theme for us really here in an architectural and interior design sense is honesty in structure. So we've not been scared to show structure. Everything you see here is a structural element. It's on display. We're not wrapping things. There's no faux language. Those big concrete steel beams, timber beams, they're 450 mil wide by 450 mil long. They're big square columns. They're reaching, in this big one here is 9 meters tall. The big beams, as you see going through the building, they're 900 mil deep by 450 wide. They're beautiful pieces of engineering, and to actually see them on display is fabulous. All the ductwork has been deliberately on display. The brickwork, again, what Wes said was touching on the local heritage. There are certain elements as we go through, your own Wall Stores campus here. Who doesn't love this space? It's truly beautiful. To see the bolts and the nuts and the connection is really, it's honest, and I think that's the easiest way to describe it. And we're trying to replicate that in a modern day world. We're starting to look at what's the new technology that's happening. It was a design idea. How do we make Geelong encourage and enhance the UNESCO City of Design? We started to talk about new industries, new structure, local procurement, bringing in local talent, and everything else. So it is something that was part of our approach from day one, and we're very lucky that the developer grabbed a hold of it and they loved it. And the client, being Geelong Council, really saw value in that as well. And that's what we've been working towards. The customer service area on display here. Again, this is about the public realm, the invited area. And then as we step up into the building, what we said before was our podium space. This is the function area / meeting rooms. We've got operable walls that can divide these 3 spaces into smaller meeting rooms or one large function center. We've got our typical office open floor plan. We've treated the design ideas being, let's insert pods into this big open floor plate. They're quite large floor plates. They're 2,000 square meter floor plates. How do we break up the scale of that? And that's into insert these little pieces of meeting rooms, breakout spaces. There are some council office spaces. But the bits that are really interesting, for instance, are these K-braces. The structure on display, seeing those things as honest expressions of structure is actually what gives it its delight. We start to look at the complementary materials palette. We've certainly been theming various floors. There's been lots of consultation with staff. Potentially Geelong have up to 800 staff moving into here. It is a big process engaging with them. What do they want to get out of their own building? What's going to make this a better workplace for them? And we've engaged with the Indigenous elders as well. We've engaged with local City of Geelong. How do we make this uniquely Geelong? How do we relate it to the landscape? And then these are very subtle gestures with regards to furniture and colour that can be used on various floor plates. Wesley, would you like to go into a bit of detail with regards to now the vision of that documentation?
Sure. So we've talked about the conception of the project. So now we're going to talk about the realisation, which can often be quite a different challenge. So this project uses BIM software, so 3D Revit. So everything's built in 3D. We can see the sheet here. And then gets translated into 2D drawings. So we're going to go through the different scales. So here we've got our 1 to 200 key plans. These are all at A0, where we use those to call out 1 to 100 general arrangement plans. So you're looking at our base build floor plans. Maybe next one. And then we do our fit out plans. You can see the images that Andrew referred to just before. These are all of the furniture placement and the meeting rooms that goes into those open offices. So we work with our interior design team at COX, both base build architects and interior designers, to put this together. Then we've got our RCPs, and we have call outs at 1 to 50s, all the stuff you don't really see in design presentations. And then we zoom in even further, and we do particular room details and itemise all the elements. So it takes quite a bit of rigour to work through all these things at different scales. And then wet areas, key to every building. We've got our 1 to 5 wall sections. And then we even go down to our 1 to 2 floor detail section. So all of this has to talk to each other. You can't really do one without the other. And when you're drawing a 1 to 2, you need to think about the 1 to 200 and the bigger picture as well.
But at the same time, we're always relating back to what was the vision? What's the design vision? So again, you're zooming out to think about what are we trying to achieve when we're detailing things? And then we're zooming back in with what is that connection? How do two materials intersect each other? What's the overlap? What works? What doesn't? And then coming back out, does that align to the design vision? Is that going to look good, you know, against the next meeting room pod? So again, it's just this constant back and forth in our focus.
Yeah, it all happens at once. You don't just work on one scale at a time. You do cyclically work through it. But it's not just plans. Obviously, it works in elevations and sections as well. So here we've got our overall 1 to 200 elevations, and then we call out particular street frontages at 1 to 50. And then we zoom in even further and we do our window schedules and elevations at 1 to 20. And then we zoom in further and go into our facade details. So this really talks about all the connections between the building systems, so your facade, your cladding, your interior, waterproofing, thermal insulation, and then even further 1 to 2 threshold details. So how do we look at maintaining those flush threshold details?
Just to touch on probably one of the other aspects, we can't take all the credit here as architects. We, there's a team around us that from structural engineers to mechanical engineers, hydraulic engineers to the suppliers and the manufacturers and the sub-consultants as well. What's unique in our industry and what's happening more and more with big projects and big scale buildings is the collaborative nature between working with industry partners. So while we might have a design idea and approach, what's happening more and more in what we call the design and construct world is that everybody is working together, and that we're working with the builders and the experts that put these things together. So XLAM is a company that specializes in timber structure. So while we have the original initial vision, they are providing us with the real world analysis of what's possible and what's not with regards to spans, with regards to beam depths, beam sizes. What's the manufacturing process? Okay, well, we can't do them to be 200 wide. You know, we need 3 layers of 90 mil timber or whatever it turns out to be. They start to drive the real world aspects of buildability, and that really does inform our design. There's no point in just being pig-headed architects and saying, well, that's how I want it, that's what it needs to be. It doesn't work like that. The focus is really working with each other in the different scales and dealing with it. We've got our K braces here. Wesley, maybe you could just talk to me. I've got kids in the background. Excuse me.
Sure. So this provides lateral stiffening for the building. So it's quite a unique shape. Obviously, it's in a bit of an L that's kinked. A lot of the CLT buildings that you'll see around, if you have a look at some plans, they're all boxes when they're on a 9x6 grid with a concrete core in the middle. So this is actually a very unique project in that respect. So the K bracing allows it to not twist and then transfers the loads down to the ground. So here you can see all of the connections, the steel base plates connecting all of the timber beams and columns together. One of the biggest considerations was the fire rating and fireproofing of all these connections. They will need to be what we refer to as tested systems. So they stand up for 2 hours. There's a 440-page fire engineering report. On a typical 9-story office building, it's 40. So it's quite a complex process it needs to go through. Maybe next slide. All of your base plates connections from your slabs through to your timber columns needs to be, it's down to the millimetre, it's all 3D modelled and tested. And here you can they're even starting to detail the actual screws and fixings that go from your columns into your beams, and it all needs to be sequenced on site. So what goes first?
I mean, it's very interesting, and even for us to be a part of this. But this is not stuff that we detail so much. This has come through the shop drawing process and collaboration with the installers and the manufacturers.
We do consider how it gets finished, though, like what the end result. Does it align with design intent? Is it flush? What color is it, etc.
Just to sort of really touch on some of the photos now, to put, you just sort of seen a series of drawings, but to actually put this into real world, this is, I think this is a live shot, isn't it? This was from
this one's from yesterday.
This is from yesterday. So if you are driving through Geelong, this is an aerial photo. We've got a camera mounted on the building next door. But you can start to see how this is all coming together. You can, what we just talked about with regards to level differences. So this is on Jerringham Street. We're almost a floor below what it is at Mercer Street. You can see how the building starts to float. The timber that's on display, everything's raw, everything's exposed. A hybrid construction, so the concrete podium, concrete construction at ground floor. We've got these beautiful concrete plinths, steel beams, which then support our floating timber boxes. Views from Mercer Street, as you can start to see how that's all coming together. Again, looking at the elements with regards to fire rating, the photo on the right here starts to illustrate this is fire check, securing some of the beams and fire rating the beams. We've got a timber ceiling, so feet to go in here, but there's a big sort of natural thoroughfare, and we've got this exposed structure that goes across. As we start to go into the building, the photo on the right is the indent is where our atrium is going to be. So we've got a double 6-story atrium. And then you start to see some of the internal spaces that we were talking about before. And I hope we all agree that it's far better than being white ceiling, commercial office, standard suspended grid ceiling system. All of this timber will be on display. We've CNC routed those holes in the beams there. That's where all our mechanical services are going through. Lots of coordination between fire pipes. That everything is it is like a Meccano set. Everything is pre-thought of before it's coming on site. Illustrations of the K-brace. As architects, I think we all love this. It's really, really nice to see. The next step is obviously to start fitting out the elements internally. But we learn every day. Our own education never changes. To see the plate connections and how this all goes together, we're as enthrilled, after doing this after 20 odd years, to see this on site now is as good as it was from year one. So it's really interesting just to sort of see how technology is changing, how things are moving and evolving, and the technology that's being integrated as well.
So we thought we might just briefly touch on the public realm and the landscape, which has been done by Aspect Studios. So you can see we've got a mixture of both hard and soft landscaping, so soft landscaping in the green. One of the key concepts, I think, for the landscape architect was, maybe next slide, Andrew, incorporating the geology of Geelong into the site, so looking at the Wadawurrung Country, basalt and sandstone, and Nuyang Mountains, and how to incorporate that language into the design language of the precinct. So we can see we've got the sandstone rocks, we've got the stratified layers of the basalt and the mountains, which all represents itself in the form and the materiality of these landscape mounds that go through. So the idea of this civic precinct being the genesis of public engagement and the genesis of the formation of the landscape. So you can see that they also start with hand sketches as well. It doesn't go straight to CAD or Revit or 3D modelling. It's all about idea generation. So we can see the sequence that they've gone through here. And then in elevation and section in mass, we can see how they build up those mounds in plan. And you can see the stratifications that refer back to the previous concept image. here we go, it's a better option. The idea that it steps and slants, it's not just vertical. The idea it can be on a shift, a more natural expression of the landscape. These are just zoning the particular areas. So we've got our central gathering space in the middle. We've got a yarning circle. We've got an old scar tree that's being relocated from a golf course and being incorporated onto the site. And then we've got a whole series of planting and trees that go throughout.
There's been a lot of engagement with Indigenous elders, with the local community about how to make this a respectful site and an inclusive site for a very diverse group of people. And Geelong is really celebrating its cultural history with regards to the old wool stores, but also going deeper with the connections to First Peoples. The site and precinct has been renamed as well, and that's been something that's been taken really well with everybody in Geelong, and it's really nice to be a part of, to be honest with you.
I think it's Warraki Nike, I believe is the name.
Thank you. I wasn't going to try.
Warraki Nike.
I need it in front of me to read.
So you can see the spur line. So what they're doing is changing the planting and the soft landscaping and changing the texture of the hard landscaping to illustrate the spur line running through the site. That's its quite literal position as it runs through the site and the building. Then obviously opportunities for seating, different type of seating running through the site. Material palette to exist to complement the civic accommodation building. We've got the bluestone concrete, and then the different types of planting topology. So their concept was the woodlands, the plains, and I don't know what the scoria cone is, but it's the light green. And then they're thinking about the natural vegetation and flora that runs through the precinct. So again, going down to the microbiology, the detail of how do we create a diverse ecosystem through the natural landscape into the site and the project. Which again was developed through Aboriginal engagement too.
And that's the overview. We've done well there. Actually, it's only 45 minutes, so we could have elaborated a little bit more, but we're more than happy to take the conversation to the floor. And if anyone's got any particular questions, we're happy to circle back to any drawing and answer anything that you might come through on the chat there.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That was absolutely incredible. I might just get you to stop screen sharing for the moment, Andrew. We've had a couple of questions on our social accounts already, and there's a couple from myself and Aaron. But if anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the live chat below for Andrew and Wes. But as for now, I might just ask a couple that I thought about. Initially, one of the first things I noticed about the design was that there's a really beautiful flow to the design, the changes from the ground to the sky, and how the concrete and steel Y supports extend and change into the timber K-brace supports. I can only assume this wasn't a coincidence, but do either of you have any other design elements throughout the rest of the building that you particularly enjoy in the overall construction? Any kind of like hidden bits and pieces that you guys really enjoy?
Got one. So you can see the curved corners, and they've actually fabricated the curved timber beams, which I think is quite unique, because quite often a lot of the CLT buildings that you see will be all angular or straight, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I think one of the unique things about this building is the fact that we've let the site and the movement through the site really drive the form of the building and some of the detailing, and we haven't fallen back on just the fabrication methodologies of this is how you do a CLT building. So some of the spans I mentioned before, the 9x6 grid, it doesn't have to be a 9x6 grid. So we've got an 11 metre by, I think we have taken up the 6 metre grid, but you can push and pull certain things. So yeah, we can see the curved timber beams here and which is quite a beautiful element as you stand through and you see the facade wrapping around. So we haven't tried to facet it. And then we've got the curved glass as well. So these minor details, they kind of add a lot.
Yeah, I think one of the other ones for me that we haven't actually seen yet will be the atrium space. It is going to be a substantial piece of kit. And as that wraps in and around, I think that's going to be quite unique as well, which is this space up here. So there's another floor to go on. So there's a lightweight steel roof with a setback in the glazing. So it's kind of like a little bit of a roof canopy that sits in there with an active roof plane. And then that will be connected. So all of these different elements between ground, podium, office, and roof will be all connected via this glazed atrium space. And I think that's going to have a really nice feel to it and a uniqueness. But for me, it's very much the timber. When we designed this and as part of our pitch to Geelong City Council was it'll smell like Christmas every day of the week. So they're holding us to that, and I'm literally going to have to buy some kind of pine
fresheners.
Pine fresheners just to walk around on day one. But look, I think the uniqueness of being in a timber building in a work environment is extraordinary, and I'd certainly love to work in a space like this myself.
Yeah. There's an incredible sensitivity to the site as well, and the history of Geelong that's included in the work. You touched on some of the surrounding buildings as inspiration, for example, the brickwork. But where else did you gather inspiration for these elements?
I think we've really looked at Geelong and to be complementary design approaches as much as anything, even down to the brick. I know the brick's the obvious one in this, but timber, expression of the timber as structure was a key point, and that was driven actually by sustainability and new industry trends. The second was exposing the steel, and the steel was really exposing the steel was driven through the Deakin, the Wool Stores buildings there, and many of those other Wool Stores buildings, because you do see lots of exposed steel, and that was something that we consciously wanted to get right in this project. The brick was important for us as well, that we selected a brick that was not new. It wasn't pretty. The idea is that it's tumbled. We wanted to get recycled brick. It wasn't available to us, but we have sourced a brick that really does complement the rest of the existing heritage sites. It doesn't look like a stock standard red pressed brick that's you might see in a Henley Homes type scenario. It is something that looks authentic and old. We're not trying to replicate the old, but we're trying to make sure that we complement all of the surrounding buildings, and that's something that we've been conscious of as well. Same with the glazing, making sure that the glazing is complementary. We've got shade fins in there as well. It's breaking up the facade. It's acting as a sunscreen. So it's trying to be sensitive to the surrounding precinct, as opposed to something that sits out, is colourful, playful, and can be completely juxtaposed to what you're seeing around it. So I think that's been a conscious effort from ourselves to really.
There's always a fine balance about we're not trying to replicate the heritage, but just make reference to it. And then also, how do we create a new heritage, something that is a building of its time and for the future? And it's the concept of the UNESCO City of Design, and I think Andrew mentioned it, the new industry. It's used to have the car service yard and so the car manufacturing and the steel manufacturing in Geelong, and what is the new industry? And that was the mass timber and CLT that is getting started up in Avalon. So it was really about trying to harness that and push that forward.
And probably one of the other buildings that we did look at, and this might sound a little bit cliche, but is the town hall. So the town hall is still the civic heart to Geelong Council, and the Geelong Council councillors, the mayor. It's something that they want to not lose focus on. We went through a process with regards to siting this building and making sure that there's a visual connection to the town hall. in the future that they hope to be able to upgrade some of the facilities there. But that will be still the main chambers of where council meetings are held. And that relationship and proximity across Johnson Park to this new civic heart is again complementary to the town hall. It's not supposed to replace it or replicate it, but it's supposed to work hand in glove, so to speak.
I've got a question from Phoebe here. With the Bayside location of Geelong, did you have to factor in the impact of the salty sea air in the design or the materials?
Yes, we do. So it's all everything. It has to be external grade. So I think if it's within 500 meters of salt water, it has to have particular specifications for the materials you use. If you're within 100 meters of breaking surf, you need to go in even higher, although we don't have that in this particular situation. But even just, creating the basement, the considerations that you're going below the water table or just very close to it. One of the things we haven't mentioned is the consideration of actually flooding of the site, and how we design just small moves in the landscape to try and push the water away and make it not flood the building. It's all part of the consideration. So,
yeah. So while yes, salt water, I think probably the bigger one is fire. As silly as that might sound, but being mass timber building, it's about how do you fire rate a building like that. So we still got we've got the timber on display. So there's a charring factor that's built into the design of that. So effectively the building, if it's on fire, it can stand up for 2 hours, and that you're prepared to lose 30 mil of timber around each of the beams, each of the columns, and the building will still stand up. So that's probably one of the bigger drivers. The intumescent paint associated with all the steel that's on display, and their structural elements. So that's all got an intumescent paint to it for fire protection, which is probably well exceeds any requirement in regards to salty air and water in the precinct.
And waterproofing is probably another big one that we're working through at the moment. So it's got a timber roof, which obviously isn't the best substrate. So there's almost 9 or 10 layers of different elements that build up to try and keep the water out.
Fantastic. Maybe a question that slightly dovetails into the previous one. A question from Vanessa. How do you see this building aging in time? Do you find it difficult or overwhelming to start large projects? So there's 2 questions there, really.
Well, I think what Wesley said, we did touch on it before. We do like to try and design projects that are ageless and that they are going to age well. Again, the whole idea of exposed structure and honesty, that they always age well when you're exposing your structure and being honest with your expression. People appreciate seeing how things work. There's nothing better than going through, whether it's an old house or an office building, and you've got barrack trusses that are suddenly all exposed, and you understand the connection between steel and timber and concrete or other elements. So I think that is the key for us, is timelessness and exposed structure go hand in hand. Timber, it's like anything. Timber ages well. It takes the knocks, to have knocks and bangs and dints and everything else on walls and timber. It's okay. It can be buffed out, it can be cleaned, or you can just leave it as is. Same with the brick, tumbly bricks. They've got rough edges. They're not supposed to be perfect. They're not supposed to be pristine. It's supposed to age as the building ages as well.
Using quality materials certainly helps in a building aging, I suppose. But going about designing a project like this is an interesting question, because you really just have to start from your first principles. I think we got given a 400-page brief, but if we started line by line going through the 400-page brief, we wouldn't have never finished. So you kind of got to think, what are the main key components of the brief from the client? and you just have a go. And so I think you saw the polished design model, but there are many, many iterations before where we're testing ideas, testing things out. So you just have to start. I think it's probably one of the biggest things you do learn from university. Sometimes you kind of get writer's block, but you just got to try, you got to test it again, and it's a process. Design is a process. It's never just done and finished. There's probably, I don't know how many man hours behind a team of 7 people working on that design for 3 months to at least get it to the design competition phase, and then we've had about 10 people after that for 2 years on it. The peaks and troughs, but it takes time to work through these things. But don't be afraid just to give it a go, and then you can always refine it and do.
We're still designing. We're still designing now. We're still changing.
We're not supposed to say that.
But it's a constant evolution. As things go up, you kind of go, oh, what an opportunity! What if we did that and this? Now we've run out of money, admittedly, and everything now is a bit of a carrot in front of somebody to try and say, look at the opportunity here. Do you want to miss this opportunity? But part of our problems as architects is that we never actually stop designing, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. But look, it's something we've got to embrace.
Okay.
Well, the first point is when there's an issue, you might have, whether it's a CAD drawing, it's a detail. The first thing anyone does is pick up a pen and start scribbling over the top. So I don't think we ever are going to take away the idea of hand drawing in any way. There's that attitude, I guess, which is solving problems we do every day, throughout the day, multiple times during the day, whether it's design, whether it's written response. You just pick up and you start drawing, you sketch, you're thinking about ideas. I think we all do that. Sometimes what we don't do is celebrate our process of thinking and hand drawing, and that's probably what we need to go back and do a little bit. The CAD, the Revit, the 3D modeling is a presentation technique, and I mean that in a CAD sense as well, because it's a 2D representation that the builders understand and use to build something. But they can do that whether it's a hand sketch or a CAD drawing. What we find, the reason that we approach, if I go back to those hand sketches, I'm just going to, if I indulge me for 1 minute. If we go back to the master plan sketch, we did this very early on, and we have an urban designer who does beautiful drawings. This drawing is an AO drawing, so it's as big as your arms, and he sits there and he draws every little detail. There is something sympathetic about this drawing where people can see the ideas to it, they understand the scale and what it's trying to illustrate, but it doesn't feel resolved. And I think that is actually one of the important things about a hand sketch is it's still open to interpretation. As soon as you put something down in a hard line CAD line, people think it's finished and, oh, okay, here it is. Here's my solution. As soon as you present a hand sketch, people are going, what a great idea. And I think there's a difference there between when we translate ideas to a resolved solution. This is not, if you CAD'd that up and you did that in AutoCAD or Revit, it would look probably a little bit naive. It might feel a little bit dumb, but as soon as it's a hand sketch, it's got a bit of tactileness to it. It's got a couple of people thrown in there. It's got it's understanding scale. That's a design idea, and I think we probably just need to think about that. So an idea to a finished solution. And that's what we really pride ourselves on, putting ideas forward that mean we can move and adjust things quickly.
I think it's a really good point. I mean, you don't need to resolve everything straight away. You might have the full brief, but you don't need to have to put it all in one drawing. And I think the other thing that clients like about the hand sketches is it gives them an opportunity. If something's not resolved, they can have input into it. They quite often have good ideas, and they want to. They might come with you with the initial concept and say, "Well, what do you think? What are your thoughts?" And then instead of just resolving all of it straight away and giving them a finished building, you need to take them on the journey and say, "Look, these are the reasons why we've made these moves," so they feel confident in moving forward. And hand sketches is a great way to do that. But at the same time that we were doing what's on the screen, done by Patrick Ness, we're also working in the 3D model as well. So we're not just moving from hand sketch to CAD or hand sketch to 3D to Revit. We're doing it all at the same time, different people with different skills, and we've all got this feedback loop. So we might interpret these hand sketches and pull it into the Revit model, and then I'll pull it into the design model, and it's all very symbiotic.
Even from going into perspective, where let's jump in the building, and this is a design model from Rhino into Lumion. But we were able to jump in and suddenly create those quick visuals. I think this is a nice image where it's like this. So again, it's that next layer of detail, and this feels a little bit more resolved. But this is not Revit. This is not the technical side to it. But everything is working in parallel, where we're pushing and pulling very quickly in our design models. And they're in SketchUp, they're in Rhino, they're in Revit as well. But you can move things very quickly in those, whereas Revit takes a little bit more time. But it depends on the process and where we're at. In contract documentation, in this particular project, our interiors team were probably 3 months behind. So while we're designing and developing the base building and the framework, they're designing the interiors to it. And we had people working in Revit, we had people working in SketchUp. So, to go back, it's actually, now that you say, it's actually quite interesting because, these were all SketchUp images, then produced in Enscape. So if you actually probably looked at our packages, we're covering a lot here between Rhino, SketchUp, Enscape, Lumion, Revit, hand sketching. I mean, we've literally got 3D Studio Max for the hero renders from our visualization team that's producing this type of imagery. So look, anything and everything. And the key is you don't need to know everything. We as a practice support people, and we try to utilize each individual skill set. So if you're particularly good at something, encourage yourself to use that typology, that program, that skill to get the best out of it. And you can work complementary with somebody else that might be better than you at Rhino, but you've got a real artistic passion for hand sketching. So you can work together and be doing the same things. You don't have to compete with your partner, so to speak. You've just got to work together to get the best result.
And I think time was a really good point there, because time sometimes dictates how you resolve issues, right? So if something's immediate, urgent on site, you might only have time to do a hand sketch, or you've got a big presentation and you're not going to be able to do a full 3D design model. So you might do snippets, or you might just do a massing model, or you might do these sketches, for example. So it's often a constant discussion of, are we CADing this? Are we documenting it? Or are we doing a diagram? Or are we doing a sketch? Or, how are we going to communicate in the most time efficient and effective way possible? It's always a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message for the students watching this about playing to your strengths and feeling comfortable with the various programs that we use, as well as sketching. And I think you kind of touched on a little bit about changing programs sometimes gives you a little bit of a different perspective, or gives you an idea of how to change or resolve a particular situation. And I think it kind of calls back a little bit to a great point you made earlier about designing from near and far, and how the space looks and feels as a user as opposed to a distant observer. Do you have any tips or suggestions for students in resolving those potential sticking points?
Look, part of that just becomes from experience, to be honest with you, and being involved in architecture in a practice. So it is very hard to explain, and it's just something that you've got to go along for a journey. Every project's unique, every site is unique. There is no right way of doing it, and if there was a formula and a cookie cutter approach, it'd be the wrong approach, and that's probably one of the keys here. So. Always just think about your site from the different aspects. And you said it before, from a user, from a designer, from a builder, from a visitor. What are you trying to get out of it? But just don't be narrow in your approach with a building site and say, well, my building site is here. And that's all you do is you put the blinkers on. Design for us is very much driven from its context and its surroundings. And that can be just, as Wesley said, you're taking something that can be 500 meters down the road. It could be 5 kilometers down the road. If there's a cultural or historical significant, something that you can draw on that is aspirational for you, that's important. And that's what we always seek to do in our work.
I think from a student perspective, I mean, you've got a very limited amount of time and resources to really produce a project. So I think defining what your project is about, I'll go a bit academic, is really important. Like, you can't explore everything, but what is your one project trying to look through? I would try and address the macro down to the micro phase, but you're not going to draw every detail. But why don't you draw the one detail that talks to the concept of your project, for example, and at each phase, you might go, so what's the urban context or the global context of the project that I'm doing? Then you might move down to the site. You might move down to a floor plate. Maybe you don't draw every floor plate, but what is the floor plate that speaks to what your project is trying to explore? And then you might go down to a section or an elevation and then a detail. So I try to be selective, I suppose, in what you're trying to portray. But I think times have changed a little bit in terms of what we produce at uni. I think there's a lot of emphasis on the presentation, the end presentation, the end final product. And I'd urge everyone probably not to get lost in the idea of, like, I've got the brief, I need to think about the final boards, the final project, because you'll lose on the process of going through. And something that I used to do, I used to go back and revisit projects and tidy them up after I presented them. And it's like, okay, well, what is the core? Try to do the exploration, have a bit of fun, learn throughout the process, learn some skills. And it's never going to be super polished. But there's time to do it. There's time to go back and do it.
But I think you can have even just some simple 3 key ideas. What are the 3 key ideas with regards to the precinct? What are you trying to achieve? Or what are the 3 key ideas regarding the built environment in the actual form of the architecture or the interiors? You can wrap it all up into some very key bits and pieces, and not get too lost in the detail.
Well, we do that on every project, don't we? We have 5 key ideas.
And they don't need to be literal. Yeah, they don't need to be literal. They can be they can be overarching, and then you can zoom in, and there can be subsets to it all. But it is nice to just go back to some, again, what we're talking about, scale of zooming in, zooming out, is as you work through your project, it's just pause. What are we trying to achieve again? Let's just go back to those fundamentals. What are those 3 key things that we talked about? And I think that's what Wesley said before is, you can, we use this analogy of zooming in, but 3 ideas. Okay, well, let's zoom in on this bit, and this bit of a building to illustrate those 3 ideas. Okay, and really keep it succinct is important. Look, we're cheating a little bit. What we're showing you here is 3 years worth of work condensed into a 45-minute presentation, and a team of over 10 people, and there's still a year to go. So it's very easy for us to sit there and say these type of things in a 45-minute session. When you're talking about a 12-week process in a semester, it is a little bit harder to sort of pare it all back. But Yeah, just keep it simple, I think, is sometimes an important factor to it.
Yeah, I think that's really fantastic advice for students. You always have a more compelling and strong project if you do have those kind of themes that are underlying in the project, or really specific points that tie exactly to the site or the user and that kind of thing. So I think that's really fantastic advice for any students who are listening to that. And really interesting to note those 5 key points of each project that you use internally within COX as well. I've got another question here, which is probably on a similar vein, from Phoebe. What were your surprises and key takeaways in engaging with the Wathaurong community through this process?
Wesley, you probably had more involvement.
I'm not sure if there are any surprises, but it's actually something that happened over a period of 12 months. I think the developer brought someone on from WSP to help facilitate that engagement with the council. So council had some representatives, the developer had a representative, and then we all got together and talked through some of the ideas. And so both within the building and within the landscape, and within the building, a lot of it was talked about some of the art initiatives and the textures and the colours that were being used through the building. And then in the landscape, it was talking about a lot of the planting and some of the wording and naming of the site. But I think it's been a really positive engagement. I did a presentation for Geelong Design Week a little while ago, talking about the integration of cultural heritage. And I think it's something that the City of Geelong can be really proud of, incorporating it into the project. I think it's quite unique. It was actually written into the brief. It wasn't just something that was tacked on at the end. And I think that's really important, and hopefully it's a bit of a catalyst for future projects to work through it. So I think some of that engagement will definitely come through as the building opens up, and you'll be able to walk through and there'll be a storyline through it, both external and internal to the site.
Okay, maybe one final question before we start wrapping things up, and more relating to the overarching theme. How did the scales of the client's brief and budget influence the final design we see in your presentation? And were there any design compromises that you had to make to achieve these constraints?
I don't think we can talk about design compromise. That would give away all of the secrets. Look, there's compromise all the way through. At the end of the day, there's a budget, there's an approach, there's a vision, and it's about getting the best that you can with what opportunity you're given. People don't have endless, deep pockets, and you've got to be conscious of designing to a budget. And as architects, we want things included. Sometimes they can't be afforded. Other times there are ways that you can get sort of 80% of what you thought you'd get, and it works. But again, that collaborative nature of working with the consultant team, with the builder, the building team, the builder sub-consultants, we've got to not be dismissive with suggestions that come from the building industry about buildability, because you can save some money. It's rob Peter to pay Paul. You can save money here, you can put money back in to here. So sometimes just by simply changing dimension of pieces of timber, something that is milled naturally, or a more standard sized element, means you can use more of it, you can be cost efficient. So we are constantly grappling, we're constantly battling, we're constantly working in collaboration with all partners to get the best value of money. And equally, this is a public building, it's a council building. It can't be extravagant, it can't be flamboyant. And again, we've put money in the structure, we've put money in the services and the base building, and we've made that sing. We're not dressing and spending money on architectural finesse that is decoration, and decoration is expensive. So again, that honesty in expression and structure is the core to it all here, because you can't take money out of it. It needs to be there to stand up at the end of the day.
So that's an accurate comment. I mean, I call them design negotiations, but it's not always just cost-driven things. There's a lot of technical aspects that drive design. We talked about the fire rating, the timber columns that kind of push you in particular directions. May not have been your original design intent, but you kind of work through it and with it. And there's also a hierarchy to what's important and what is less important. But generally, our job at the end of the day is to try and meld and marry all those things together. So it's a challenge, and it's a challenge until the building kind of gets done. But one of the things you can do is stage a project or phase particular parts of a project and to spread cost out. So it's another discussion about strategies, project strategies.
I think that's probably one of the really good things, is that you didn't really need to be budgeting for decoration so much when you were using all that beautiful exposed structure, right? It's kind of, it's already there, it's built in.
Yeah, the more you can integrate into the fundamental basis of the design, the less likely it is to be value managed out or taken out or not seen as kind of a frivolous expense. So we try and really have, the key elements as integral to the form and function of the building.
Yeah, again, probably going back to the, having those key ideas that underpin the entire project, it just makes it a more solid project overall, doesn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I think it might be time to finish up for tonight. So I'd like to thank Andrew and Wes again for joining us here for our final real lecture of 2021. Make sure you keep an eye on our social accounts to see our return date for our next series in 2022. And lastly, if you're feeling inspired and need more real lecture content during our break, you can check out the Real Lecture Facebook and Instagram accounts, and also our blog. And you can also watch previously recorded lectures right here on our YouTube account. And that's all from us for this year. We'll see you next time.